Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little 11-game NBA slate or MLB slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? So it really helps the channel a lot. So we do have a pretty interesting slate today. We do have a game in Colorado, so do keep that in mind. Pitching is pretty deep today, but it's also fairly expensive to have the good ones. And then we do have some pretty interesting teams. About half the teams should score over 4 runs today, and half the teams are under that. So that is pretty interesting for a slate like this. It's going to be high scoring, I suspect, but it's going to be you're going to have a lot of variety in how you can make a lineup today. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we're going to start with our pitchers. Now, I'm going to tell you the ownership rank first here. So Grayson Rodriguez for Baltimore will be the highest owned pitcher probably. George Kirby, Jose Soriano, and then Dylan Case will be probably the top 4 there. So let's go ahead and look at Grayson Rodriguez for Baltimore. Now, he's got a favorable matchup in Seattle. His ceiling is lower than the guys around him, but he does feel pretty safe today. He's also one of the better strikeout rate guys on the slate, so he has a lot of potential from that perspective. And he's got the favorable matchup here. I do like him quite a bit. He's been pretty good lately too, so he definitely has a lot of upside, and his team should win this game. Then we'll look at Ronaldo Lopez as another good option here as a contrarian option from Rodriguez. He'll be pretty low owned just because of the matchup and his K rate, but he's been really good, and he has a lot of good upside here. He's only had 1 game this season where he gave up more than 2 earned runs. The K rate is the big question mark here, but I do think he's got some upside in this matchup against the Giants, so I do think he's a very interesting option on the slate. And he's also at home, which has helped him a little bit more this season as well. He's really limited, though, the total earned runs. He's only given up 4 home runs on the season. So I do think he's a good option as a core play, but he's a little pricey today at $9,600, whereas and he's about the same price as Rodriguez, who's a little bit safer. But both those are my top 2 plays. Lopez definitely being the contrarian play because he's not going to have the high ownership like Rodriguez will. The other options today for GPP options, George Kirby for Seattle. He has a very tough matchup against Baltimore, but Baltimore has been inconsistent this season. He did have a bad game against Baltimore earlier this year, but he's still capable of a good game here. That's why he's a GPP play. He's got a good strikeout potential, and he is a solid option. He's a little bit cheaper than some of the other options on the slate too. The only drawback here is the matchup, and some of the other players that you're going to choose against him have better matchups than he does. Then we'll look at Tariq Skubal for Detroit against Minnesota. Minnesota does tend to strike out a lot. He has got a high ceiling here as a result, though he does have a low floor. He's had a lot of low floor games lately, though he has faced a relatively tough schedule, so he's definitely a good play on the slate as he has good strikeout stuff and good potential on this one, but he is a GPP play. Dylan for San Diego also in play for this slate. He's been inconsistent this season as well, but he's safer than Skubal is, but he's still somewhat risky. He's got a decent ceiling here, but his K rate is really good, so he's definitely got high upside, though Texas is a team that, while they have struggled this season, have some pop occasionally. Lewis Gill for the Yankees also in play today, though he has struggled recently in his last 2 games. He's been good all season, but the last 2 games are just really bad, though they were somewhat tougher matchups, so I do think he can get back on track here. The K rate has been very inconsistent. In those last 2 games, he only had 3 total strikeouts. He doesn't have the highest K rate on the slate by any imagination. He's going to be somewhat lower owned, so he's going to be a contrarian player on the slate, but he's definitely worth a look. I think Jose Soriano for the Angels, he's going to be relatively popular because he's going against the Angels today, and he is back from his he should be back today from his injured list. He is an interesting play, though, because he does have some upside, and he's nice and cheap. He's had some really good games this season, though he is a little bit contrarian. I do think Oakland can score a couple of runs here, but they don't typically score a ton of runs, and he's got a good enough strikeout rate that he has some potential. Another boomer bust play would be Eovaldi for Texas. He's got a tough match against San Diego, but he does have a good ceiling. He's just got an extremely low floor. And then another kind of a Hail Mary play would be Mitch Spence, who also should have a decent ownership today for Oakland against the Angels. The Angels have struggled this season. He's been very up and down. He's an extreme boomer bust play, but he's cheap, so he's definitely worth a look from that perspective. Let's go ahead and look at our catchers now. So from catching today, we have a couple of guys that look really good. One being Contreras from Milwaukee. Now, he's in Colorado this weekend, so yesterday he had an absolutely monster game with 3 hits and scored 24 fantasy points. He's definitely capable of that again in this matchup, in this situation, and he really does He really did play well yesterday, and we liked him a lot then. I don't think the metrics are quite as good today as they were yesterday, but they're still absolutely phenomenal. And Milwaukee is the top stack on the slate, so he's definitely worth a look. Whoever starts for Colorado will also be in play here. He had whether it be Diaz, Stallings, or Goodman, all three of these guys have a lot of potential today, and their metrics are all fantastic. If any of them in the starting lineup, then you can utilize them at catcher. Some other guys you could use here: Elias Diaz, Sean Murphy, and Austin Wells. But your top ownership options will be Austin Wells, Sean Murphy, Alejandro Kirk, and William Contreras. I do think that any of those guys have a lot of potential, and they're all over the place in the pricing. So it's probably the position. While it's going to be popular to put in Contreras, you can definitely pay down to help you pay other places because there's plenty of good options there. First base, though, may be the position that has the most options on the slate. Ohtani has obviously been absolutely phenomenal this season and continues to be phenomenal. He's got a lot of home run potential every time out, and that doesn't change much today against Nelson for Arizona. So he definitely looks good today. Some other options, though, at this position: Michael Busch is a pretty good cheap play for the Cubs. He's got a favorable matchup here. He's been somewhat inconsistent, but he does have some home run upside today, so he's definitely worth a look. He's going to be relatively contrarian on the slate as well. Rice Hoskins has been a very popular play lately for Milwaukee, and he'll continue to be a decent play today. Even though he didn't do much yesterday, he's been getting hits in a lot of the games lately, so he's got some good potential for a home run and has some upside here. Matt Olson also in play, though he is fairly expensive at $5,200 for Atlanta. They have a pretty favorable matchup here, and I think he draws some good upside on the slate as he's been better lately. Jake Bauers for Milwaukee also in play today. He's going to have that boost simply because of the situation there and Colorado. And if you can fit him in there, then he's definitely worth a look, because if Hoskins was to not start or something, he would definitely be a contrarian play off of him. And then Vlad Jr., he's been phenomenal recently, hitting some home runs, but now he's banged up a little bit. But we'll see if he plays today. If he is, then he'll be somebody I would consider today, but he definitely carries some risk. The top overall our top ownership today will be Ben Rice, Jake Bauers, and Rice Hoskins, and then Ohtani. I think that going with Milwaukee is definitely a good strategy today, especially in cash games. But I do think Ben Rice is a nice cheap play for the Yankees that can give you some upside and cheap opportunity there. Looking at second base, we'll start with Brendan Rodgers. His stats just jump off the page a lot today. He is a core play for me for Colorado, and he's been inconsistent this season, but he's really improved the last few games. And this matchup against Milwaukee does give him a lot of favorability ratings, and he's going to be a pretty popular play on the slate as well, I think. His metrics are really solid. Bryce Terang is a top play for Milwaukee, though he's a little bit overpriced here. He doesn't have the home run potential that I would like at his price point, but he's definitely worth a look in this game. Again, and if you stack up the Colorado, then he'd definitely be somebody to consider. Nico Horner for the Cubs are very interesting today. I think the Cubs look pretty good today, which they've kind of struggled off and on, but they do look good today, so he's definitely worth a look. And then Brandon Lowe is another guy that I really think has some potential today, though he is a little bit riskier. He has not hit the ball particularly well, but the metrics are solid for him today, so he's definitely worth looking at. The top ownership today will be Brandon Lowe, Brendan Rodgers, Bryce Terang, and Gleyber Torres. Torres definitely falls into category as a decent option as well. Richie Palacios is another guy you could consider. Looking at third base, we do like third a lot today. It's got some good options, though it's a little bit riskier than some of the other positions. It's not super expensive like some of them, but Chris Morel for the Cubs looks very interesting today. He has been really boom or bust all season. His price is still pretty fair, though, so he's definitely worth a look. Manny Machado looks good for San Diego against the Texas. He's been struggling some, but he's had a couple really big games, and his hitting has really improved the last week or two. Now, if he can get over 10 or 15 fantasy points, then he can definitely pay off here. Austin Riley has struggled most of the season, but he's finally starting to hit the ball again, so he's definitely worth a look right now. He's typically a little bit streaky this season, at least. Isaac Paredes also looks interesting for Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay is kind of a sneaky team today. He's been inconsistent, but has some home run upside on the slate, which is hard to find at this position sometimes. And then Alex Bregman, he's going to be the highest ownership guy, and he's got a lot of potential as he's been priced really fairly all season long, and he is getting good fantasy points occasionally, so he definitely falls into a good category today. He'll be the top owned guy along with Justin Turner and Isaac Paredes. I think that's a little bit of a contrarian position today, but I do think you could go about it a lot of different ways. Looking at shortstop, Bobby Witt Jr. for Kansas City. I mean, he's always going to be somebody that you got to consider because of how good he's been this season. His metrics are solid today. They're not as good as they've always been, but he definitely looks good today. Willie Adames for Milwaukee. His price has come up because of this game being in Colorado, but it definitely has the potential. He still has the potential today to pay off as he has home run upside on the slate. Tover for Colorado as well looks good for Colorado. I think Colorado will score some runs today, much like yesterday where this game was 8-7 between these two teams. I look for this to similar today, and I think Tover is one of the better options on the Rockies. Corey Seager does have some good potential today, but we'll have to wait and see if he starts. And then Bichette for Toronto. He's been kind of contrarian lately. He's been having some good games, and he's definitely capable. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but he does draw good metrics on the slate as he's hitting the ball better. The top ownership guys today will be Tover, Taylor Walls, Bo Bichette, Bobby Witt, Willie Adames, and Anthony Volpe. You can go a lot of different ways at this position. And I think that it's a pretty wide open position, to be honest, because most of the guys are in similar price points. If we look at the outfielders, Ohtani does jump off the page as a great play here as well. Yelich for Milwaukee is a very interesting play. He's very expensive, but he's been absolutely phenomenal lately, and he's got really good home run metrics today. Even if he doesn't get a home run, he can do other things and score enough fantasy points. He's also getting a lot of stolen bases lately, which is really helping boost his fantasy output. Aaron Judge and Soto and Bellinger all have good potential, but they're all extremely expensive. But if we're going to get to some value plays at this position, we'll start with Brendan Marsh for Philly. He does come off the page today at a really solid play. He's had some really good games lately, and he has home run upside today. Even though he's been somewhat inconsistent this season, he does have some good metrics on the slate. Josh Lowe also looks phenomenal for Tampa Bay. His metrics are just off the charts today. This matchup is really good for him, and so he's somebody I'm probably going to try to roster quite a bit. Even though he has struggled this season, the metrics are really off the chop today. Ian Happ is also a guy that I like a lot today. He has hit the ball pretty well lately with a couple home runs the last 4 games, and I think he draws another good game for that kind of potential. And I really wanted to make him a core play as well, but I just didn't want to make all 3 outfielders core plays to start. But he's probably my third favorite of those guys. Some other options, though, Frelick for Milwaukee. He looks really solid today. He's been pretty good, inconsistent, though, this season, but he does have good hitting metrics. Not a huge home run threat, but he does have good hitting metrics. And then Garrett Mitchell for Milwaukee as well. If he was to draw the start today, he'd be a nice contrarian play. He played his first game this season yesterday, and it looks like he's going to have some more potential today. If he can get in there and do well, then he'll have a lot of upside because he's still nice and cheap and a very expensive matchup. The top ownership at this position will be Juan Soto, Corbin Carroll, Josh Lowe, and Winslow Perez. The other top ownership options, Garrett Mitchell, Christian Yelich, Trent Grisham, Jordan Alvarez, Hunter Renfroe, Nolan Jones, Sal Frelick, and Jackson Chourio. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do Milwaukee today. If we look at our stacks, Colorado and Milwaukee are both going to be the top overall stacks. They have a ton of upside today. But I also think the Dodgers, the Yankees, Atlanta, and the Chicago Cubs look really good today. Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Philly, Houston, Toronto, Baltimore, Detroit, they all have players from their teams that I think have a lot of potential and are worth taking a look at. I'm not thinking that I would stack a lot of those teams, but I think that they're teams that you definitely can pull some guys from. And then the Angels, Minnesota, Oakland, San Diego Padres, Seattle, Texas, San Francisco, Arizona, and Cincinnati. They're going to be the teams that are going to a little bit struggle more today for runs. And so only picking a couple guys from those teams like one-off options is the best way to go today. Obviously, some of those teams do have some good one-off options, but they're a little bit riskier today. I definitely like a couple guys on Texas, Seattle, and Oakland from that perspective. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting,